And Luke's story, then, as you say, among the differences, the Annunciation, Gabriel comes to Mary, and in fact, this is the most distinguishing feature about I guess the writing of Luke, both in the Acts, which he's I guess believed to have written, and Luke, that women play such a prominent role in these stories.
Exactly. Well, you'd think it would be obvious, wouldn't you? If we're talking about a birth story, you might want to mention the mother,
right?
But you'd almost get the idea that you could tell the story without the mother in Matthew. Luke insists not only is Mary the first thing she does after the angel announces it, she doesn't even bother go out and tell Joseph, there's good news and there's bad news. She goes immediately in this story, to her cousin Elizabeth, and the women rejoice together. And it's told very much from a female point of view, and that, of course, is in keeping with the emphasis on women throughout Luke's Gospel, and it's one of the ways you recognize immediately that the purpose of a nativity story for Matthew and for Luke is to be a sort of an overture, microcosm, miniature summary of the Gospel to follow. So the themes that come up in Matthew 1 and 2 and Luke 1 and 2 will be repeated, like themes, as it were, throughout an opera or something that you've heard in the overture, throughout those two Gospels. And you just mentioned one of them, a major one for Luke, the emphasis on the women and on Mary.
What do you make of the idea? I've heard it, I don't think it's very widely held, but there's been some belief that perhaps, or some question about whether or not the person who wrote Luke was in fact a woman. Is there anything to that?
It would be very hard to tell, but I would not think so, because one of the distinctive things in Luke, and it's a little ambiguous, is that he talks an awful lot about women, but it's not very clear to me that Luke wants them in charge. They're major sponsors of Christian communities for Luke, but some of my feminist colleagues have noted that enthusiastic sponsors are not exactly the same as major leaders. So I'm not sure that Luke is a woman.
Why do you figure the story in Luke is sort of the one told the most? Is it just because it's a better story? I mean, you've got shepherds, you've got it's just a better tale, maybe.
Well, I think yes. I mean, I suppose if I had to be ruthless about the whole thing, and I said, would I choose Luke as a better storyteller over Matthew, it's probably very unfair to do this. But yeah, I mean, if you look actually at the images throughout Christian art that have been drawn on the Nativity, just go through them. As I said, you'll find hundreds of the Annunciation from Gabriel to Mary. I'm sure you'd find hundreds. I would doubt if you'll find more than a couple, if you even find a couple, of the Annunciation to Joseph. Luke sets the scene much better. For example, the crib scene is basically totally Luke. Let's say it's 95% Luke, with the three wise men tucked at the back just to try and kind of bring it in. But that's all that comes from Matthew in the crib scene.
At what point did this question about these birth stories that they were fact? When did they first emerge in Christianity? Because you say that it's fairly recent, the last few hundred years.
It really is. I think it's a post-Enlightenment phenomenon. In a pre-Enlightenment world, and it would be very foolish to think that pre-Enlightenment people were all fools. They just believed anything they were told.
Sure.
Pre-Enlightenment people did take it for granted that wonderful things could happen. There was too much in the world that could not be explained. Just trying to explain, say, the order of the heavens. I mean, if they could see the planets moving with the same rhythms and everything else, so common sense would say there must be somebody up there driving on a kind of a superhighway in the sky. So many of their explanations we would not accept today, but that doesn't mean they were fools. So they would accept that marvels happen. And the only real pre-Enlightenment question was, okay, you're telling me this marvelous story, and I have no reason to doubt your marvelous story since I know lots of other marvelous stories. Why should I care about your marvelous story? You're telling me about a wonderful child born of a divine and human relationship. Okay, fine. First century person might say pre-Enlightenment. I've heard those stories before. I've even heard them about the Roman Emperor Augustus. His mother Atia and the god Apollo conceived him. Okay, tell me why I should care. Not why I should disbelieve, but why should I care? What's this child brought to the world that's worthy of such a divine conception? Those are all good pre-Enlightenment questions, and they are really the real questions. What claim has been made when you say, in the ancient world, this child was born of a divine and human conjunction? What claim are you making about not the mother and her biology, but about the child and his destiny?
You know, it brings us to this question that you and Marcus Borg raise in the book about this idea of fact fundamentalism, that if it's not factual, it's not true. But you see it very differently.
Yeah, it's terribly important, and when I think the New Testament authors are presenting me with a fact, such as that Jesus did exist, that Jesus was born, that Mary and Joseph were his parents, that he was crucified, for example, when they are telling me a fact, I take those facts very seriously. But I also know, and if you believe, for example, the New Testament is inspired, I see no reason why God can't inspire parables. Seem to have been Jesus' predominant mode of teaching. And I think all the New Testament writers picked that up from Jesus. So I have no problem at all with saying that when you're confronted with a parable, you don't ask about the facts. When you're confronted with the prodigal son, you shouldn't ask, hey, was there really a father with those two sons? I think the answer would be, it's a parable, Dominic.
Yeah.
And asking the fact questions when you're confronted with a parable is the best way, the smartest way to avoid the issue. Do you believe in it? Are you going to accept the message of the parable? So I think pre-Enlightenment people were quite capable of hearing a story and bracketing the immediate say, wait a minute, did that actually happen? But getting the message, and then, of course, they would either agree or disagree with the message, with the point.
Which, of course, brings us to kind of the landscape of American Christianity today, which, as you explain in the book, at least a half of American Christians have a kind of literal, factual understanding, for example, of the Genesis stories of creation and of the Bible as a whole. And you say in the book that this kind of sets up a test, that if whether Jesus was in fact born of a virgin now becomes a test of faith. And I guess in some ways American Christians who believe very literally in it are sort of painting themselves into a corner, are they not?
Well, I think they really are, Doug, and in one sense they are both. Both sides of this debate are trapped in the Enlightenment. If you want to sort of oversimplify the Enlightenment and imagine it as saying, well, the only truth is factual truth, and whether you can prove it as in science, as you usually can. If you have a theory in science, you can go out usually and test it and see if it works for you as it works for me, and if it doesn't work for you and does work for me, there's a problem. That became almost the norm of truth, not just of scientific truth, but of any truth. And it kind of wiped out poetry, and it wiped out metaphor, and it wiped out parable for any people. The real truth had to be factual. Now, neither of us are saying that factual truth is not important. If I ask you for directions how to get to your house, I really want you to give me factual truth. If I'm reading a recipe, I want factual truth. I want to know how much flour to put in. Don't tell me a pinch. Tell me in ounces or something.
Yeah.
So there is a place, of course, for factual truth, of course. But there is also a part, and religion is especially redolent with metaphorical, poetic, parabolic truth. And to have lost that is to have conceded the Enlightenment to the wrong side, so that in one sense those who are trapped in saying, this is just a tissue of contradictions. Read this birth story of Luke and the birth story of Matthew. They can't agree on anything. Ha, ha, ha. That's one side. The other side, no, you can take them very carefully and put them together, and you get a single homogeneous account of what happened. They are both wrong. They are really locked on the two faithful sides, and they're drowning together, clasped in each other's arms. If I could say it again, it's a parable. It's a parable. It's a parable.
Let's take a few calls. Rob is with us, and he's calling from Ogden, Utah. Rob, hi.
Hi, how's it going?
Great.
Just had a question. About a year ago, I kind of began my own self-enlightenment or period of enlightenment here where I'm an ex-Mormon, the history of the Bible and the church. I've really come to see how a lot of that stuff is parable. It's made a huge difference in my life, and I'm much happier with it now. And I'm wondering if the guest thinks that that's going to continue, or if it will be a while before people begin to take these things as parable, put them in not such a truth historical sense in their lives, but something that just more gives the guidance rather than anything literal fact.
I hope so, Rob. I hope what Marcus and I are trying to do in this book, and we were hoping to do it the last week, the preceding book, and others we're going to write together, is really to empower the center of Christianity, to get out of that deadly strife that if it isn't factual, it is rubbish. We're trying to insist on the power of parable, and we think we are completely in keeping with the best of the Christian tradition in doing that. So yes, I hope there's going to be more and more understanding of when we are talking about facts and when most of the time in the Bible we're talking about parable.
Rob, glad you called. Thanks very much. Shane is with us, calling from Salt Lake. Shane, hi.
Good morning.
Morning.
One thing I've always wondered about is, for such a big moment in history, I've never heard of any other texts, whether factual or parable, like you say, which I've never actually thought of it as. I'm wondering if there are any other texts from that era, thousands of years ago, about Jesus' birth that didn't appear in the New Testament.
No, Shane. No, when Jesus was born, and wherever Jesus was born, nobody was watching. And let me give you an example. I can't even remember the date now. It may have been before or after 1900. Gandhi was taken off the train at Petermaritzburg. Nobody was watching. I doubt if it even made the papers. But years later, Gandhi would say, that's when it all began for me. In many historic periods, moments, people's lives, the first moment where it started, nobody was watching. So no, the angels had to come down that night from heaven to draw attention to it. Nobody was watching, except maybe the animals.
Shane, glad you called. Scott is with us in Salt Lake. Scott, welcome.
Yes, hello. One of the things that I enjoy about the New Testament is how many different English translations there are, because I feel like for those of us who don't know the original Koine Greek, how much perspective they can give us on different ways of looking at the Greek. But one of the question that I have is that some translations have astrologers in Matthew chapter 2, others have the term wise men, and others have the term magi. And I guess what my question to you is are they in fact the same? Are they just synonyms for the same thing? Or are each of the translators getting kind of a different take on what those people were that came from the East?
They're all probably valid. The term is the magi, and those are Persian wise men, and the Persian wise men were skilled and known in the reading of the skies, somewhere between astrology and astronomy. So astronomers would be good, ancient astronomers. Magi would be good, wise men. I don't know if it would be politically correct at the moment to say, of course, they were then Iranians. So we have 3 Iranians in our crib this Christmas.
Wow. Well, let me ask you, Professor Crossan, that story of the Magi, it's so particular. They came, they brought gifts, and not only gifts in a generic sense, they brought gold and frankincense and myrrh. What is Matthew getting at with being so specific if he's trying to speak in metaphors? Does that just empower the symbology, I guess, of the story?
Yes. The other major story, to which this is a counter story, was that under Caesar Augustus and his adopted father, Julius Caesar, the story of their genealogical origin was that 1,000 years before, at the time of the Trojan War, Aeneas, the Aeneid is his story, of course, Aeneas, who is the son of Venus, the goddess Venus, and the Trojan hero Anchises, was led westward guided by Venus's westward star.